Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Subsect Live session. Today, I am going to talk about some of the lessons that I have learnt about trees, and I should say from trees. Excuse me. And two things that are going to be slightly different this morning. One of them is that I have got notes here so that I can add the notes to the Substack Live session before I post it, so that for those of you that prefer to read rather than listen, it makes it easy for you. But secondly, my chat this morning was stimulated by this amazing photo that was sent to me by my good friend David Pott in the UK. And evidently, this tree, which is probably about 400 years old, was the very tree that stirred Tolkien to create Tree Bear and the Ents in the Lord of the Rings series. It's certainly worth looking up. And I've spent quite a bit of time this morning just looking at this tree and also being inspired by it, just the way that Tolkien was, and that I think my friend David was as well. And evidently, this tree is about 400 years old and was probably planted in the days of Henry VIII. But one of the comments that somebody made was a link to the ancient tree inventory in Britain. And I was delighted to see that there are still quite a few ancient trees in the UK and hopefully in other parts of the world as well. Some of the yew trees are close to 5,000 years old, and some of the oaks 1,000 years old. And I just look at these trees and I think, wow, we are so insignificant. We are so small. And yet, the amazing thing to think about is the fact that God loves us, God cares for us, and God's thoughts are towards us as well. That's what I was thinking about this morning. And of course, trees are amazing in so many ways, not just because some of them are aged, but because of the fact that this planet would not be sustained without trees. And I think of the controversies about logging in the Amazon, and the knowledge that as the Amazon forests are reduced, then the amount of oxygen that goes into the air is reduced, and the amount of CO2 that is absorbed is reduced as well. And I think of the many other forests around the world. Here in the Pacific Northwest, once upon a time, it was covered in huge fir tree forests, to the extent that some of the early European explorers felt oppressed by the amount of trees. And so you think, well, no wonder they thought they could go out and log as many of them as they wanted to. But in doing so, of course, they were cutting off some of what they needed to survive in terms of the oxygen that these trees were putting into the air. And I think of other things that probably have been destroyed at the same time as we have destroyed the forests. Not just the balance of CO2 and oxygen, but also, our hunger for land, our hunger for timber, our hunger for money that has driven so much of the devastation that we've seen. One of the things I know I've commented on before is that every time we go out to the island of Camino, one of the things I find is that more trees have been cut down. But part of what this sent me on, and I'm sorry if this still sounds a little bit distracted, was looking for the oldest trees in the world. And evidently, what is probably the oldest tree in the world is called Methuselah, seems very appropriate. And it is a Great Basin bristlecone pine in California. It's thought to be about 5,000 years old, if not older. And there are similar ancient pines as well, and they think some of them could possibly be older. But, um, these all give me a sense of the insignificance of who I am and what I'm doing. And they also give me a feeling of traveling back in time. Have you ever visited an ancient tree? It's really quite an experience, even one that is only 400 years old, like the tree that I showed you here. But can you imagine visiting Methuselah and being able to look up at this tree? Much of it is dead wood, but it is still a tree that speaks of longevity. And as I said, reinforces again the insignificance that I feel and the wonder of the fact that God does not only know me, but knows me by name. When there are all these incredible ancient structures around the world, that God knows me by name is quite impossible. It's quite amazing, I should say. Um, Interestingly, there are these mono trees in a way, I suppose you could call them, or individual trees that are huge and that are old. But actually, the oldest tree in the world is what is known as a clonal colony. And this is the Pando tree, which is in Utah, which is thought to be between 14,000 and 80,000 years old. Tragically, some of it's been destroyed by vandals because, of course, it covers a huge area, as you can imagine. But again, and one of the things that I learned from this kind of tree is the interconnectedness of all things. And of course, that's something that I'm passionate about because we particularly learn it from the mother trees in a forest where, as we've been learning in recent years, there are microbial filaments that go out to all the other trees of the forest. They connect so that the trees can protect each other, so that the trees can nourish each other, so that the trees, something, can communicate all kinds of things to others. So destroying the mother trees, so many of which have been destroyed around the world, has, I think, dire consequences that we don't even realize. One of the things that I read about recently is that the number of ticks is exploding in some parts of the United States. And some people think that it is because of the fact that we have cut down the trees that once upon a time provided the natural environment for these ticks. And they're kind of exploding because other creatures have been gotten rid of. And obviously that's a conversation for another time. But I think sometimes we don't recognize the consequences of our actions on this planet and how so much of what we have destroyed has consequences not just for us, but for other creatures as well. Here in the Pacific Northwest, I'm very aware of trees. When I first came to the United States and saw the incredible forests of this part of the world, I was absolutely awed because even though Australia has beautiful trees, the eucalyptus trees, there's something very different about them. And I look out here and I see a single Douglas fir tree. Now, when I look out at the tree, it looks absolutely beautiful because on this side of the tree, it has not been destroyed in any way, shape, or form. But on the other side, virtually all of the branches up to a height of about 40 feet have been removed so that it doesn't interfere with the electrical wires that go across, of course, our street. And I look at that tree and I think, is it crying inside? Now, no, you might think, well, that's a bit kind of, um, uh, well, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's, oh, good grief, I've touched something on my iPad that I shouldn't have touched here. And so I've lost my train of thought. But even so, you know, this tree speaks to me of the beauty of these tall trees that are meant to be in huge forests in ways that we don't understand. Um, and it's it's amazing to see them. And then next to it is the maple tree that many of you may have seen featured in some of the things that I have done in the past, because it's what I call my sentinel tree. It's the one that heralds the seasons for me. And I look out at the moment, it's beautifully green. But in a few months, it will get a red streak right down the center of it. It's the first tree that I can see around me that starts to change for autumn. And then, of course, it loses its leaves and it stands there, a skeleton, a sentinel of winter. And then I start to see in the early springs, the green leaves slowly start to unfold. And it heralds each of the seasons for me. And I think it is such not just a beautiful kind of sentinel for me, but it is also an indicator of the rhythm of life and the way that trees accept that rhythm of life. They don't try to, at least they don't seem to, try to hang on to their leaves at the end of the summer when they're meant to be slowly changing color and disappearing. But those trees just let go. They are into the rhythm of life that they know is what sustains them through the rest of the year. But there are other ways that trees inspire me too. I love it when I go up to Camino Island, and there are two trees that really inspire me. The first is this one here that I call my Celtic tree, because as you can see, there's what looks like Celtic braiding in that tree. And I always love to visit this tree when I go up there because it speaks to me. I suppose you could say it's my memory tree in some ways these days, because it speaks to me of the many retreats that we were able to hold up on the island and just the beauty of the trees that have always been around me. The other tree is this one with its three branches there. In many ways, it speaks to me of the Trinity, and I do like to call it my Trinity tree because of the three images that it has there. And there are other trees that speak to me too, but these ones particularly speak to me of the way that because of the age of so many of these trees, they have memories that we don't. And I look at these trees and I think, do you remember the retreats that we used to hold up on this land? Do you remember the people coming and worshiping God here? And the people, not only us that have worshipped there, but I think of the many Indigenous tribes that used to evidently gather on the island and how many of those would have enjoyed, some of them, not just these same trees, but probably others that would have been similar to them. And they too would have worshipped in this place. And they too would have enjoyed the bounty of this place in ways that I cannot fully understand at all. Um, After a storm here in Seattle, I like to go out and collect what the trees have let go of in order to survive. Sometimes branches, sometimes just small leaves, sometimes even pieces of bark or maybe pine cones. And I like to use them to create mandalas or to create uh, um, accents in my gardens, in my meditation gardens that I create. And there is a beauty that trees provide for us in so many ways. You know, they are not just the lifeblood of this planet, but they are so many other things as well. The tree of life. Some of you may remember that a couple of years ago I did a post about reflecting on the tree of life and how, to me, the tree of life looks far more like a giant mother tree connected to all the other trees of the forest than it does like a little apple tree sitting in the corner of an orchard or of a walled garden in the way that it was often depicted in medieval gardens. And I think, you look at the imagery in Revelation of the tree of life on both sides of the river. It talks about providing food in every season. And I love that because, as I say, a forest is a much better image to me of what the tree of life is like than a single tree even. And there's so much I think that we can learn about that and about our need, I suppose, to sustain and to revive trees. Now, obviously, I could go on about the lessons that I've learnt for trees, the lessons I've learnt from the eucalyptus trees in Australia that are able to survive both drought and flood, sometimes being inundated and standing in water of several feet high for several months. They can survive as well as years of drought. Or I could speak about the giant evergreens that survive the cold of the winter by retracting their sap into the core of their being so that they can survive. And not just the evergreens. I mean, the reason we get maple syrup harvested in winter is because of this retracted sap that gets sweeter and becomes something like antifreeze. I could talk of so many other lessons, forest bathing, and I can go on. And obviously, I do have that tendency at a time like this to want to go on and on. But all I can say is that trees are magnificent and they have so much to teach us in so many different dimensions of life. And I hope that maybe you will go out and hug a tree today, or at least stare up into its branches and admire the beauty of it and think about what lessons you could learn from the trees and how they could inspire your imagination in the same way that they inspired Tolkien's imagination. Please let me know what you think about and what comes to you as you go out and look at the trees in your neighborhood, whatever kind of trees they are, because there are so many lessons that we can learn from them. And I hope that you too will continue to learn from them. And as a result of that, maybe even desire to preserve and conserve trees as well.